Um, let's see. Our next English session will be welcoming back Dr. Danielle Carnes, and that will be August 19th. So you can stay tuned for our session with Dr. Carnes next week. The Parkinson's Foundation hosts weekly education and wellness programs through PD Health at Home virtual programming. You can join us. You found us here for Mindfulness Mondays, our Wellness Wednesdays, and our Fitness Fridays. Our next Wellness Wednesday will be hosted this week on August 14th. There are many daily challenges associated with Parkinson's that may lead to social discomfort and ultimately isolation. So next week's webinar will focus on a few that may be less talked about. That could include drooling, urinary incontinence, dyskinesia, and even eating in public. So we'll discuss how each impacts the person with Parkinson's. And our speaker will address ways to speak to family and friends about how these visible symptoms can cause self-consciousness in social situations. So if this is something that you feel you or your loved one are challenged with, please join us on opening up on uncomfortable topics this week. And our presenter is our own Dr. Taylor Rush, who's going to be facilitating today's session in mindfulness. Great. So that'll be it for our opening remarks. I want to welcome Dr. Taylor Rush back to our Mindfulness Mondays. He's going to be leading us through a very interesting topic today. Dr. Rush.
Thank you, Krista. Hi, everyone. It's good to see you all today. I thought we would try something a little different today. I tell Krista, I always like to experiment with topics with you guys, and a lot of it emerges from my own practice with patients who have Parkinson's. And today I wanted to talk a little bit about what we call bottom-up sensory processing. And that sounds very scientific and technical, but I promise we will break it down and discuss what that means. So when we think about mindfulness, a big part of that is being aware of our internal as well as our external experiences. And for those of you who have joined us in mindfulness practice before or have cultivated your own practice personally, you know that attuning to your internal and external experiences can be incredibly complex. In any given day, we are processing and integrating all kinds of information from ourselves and our environment so that we know, what do we need to do to take care of ourselves? What do we need to do to act appropriately in any given situation? And then when you add on, how do I then also tackle how to manage Parkinson's symptoms on top of everything else? It can be even more challenging and sometimes even, pretty overwhelming. So when we think about how we process all this information that comes to us through our bodies, as well as through our environment and the world around us, we talk about it sometimes in terms of top-down processing versus bottom-up processing. So top-down processing is just that. It starts from the top. It starts with how we think about things. And we use our knowledge and our experience to interpret information or events. So an example of this might be where someone might be thinking about something that's going to come up. Maybe they have a social event that's going to come up and they think, gosh, the last time I went to a social event like this, when it was this big, I noticed that my Parkinson's symptoms got worse. I noticed that it was harder for me to engage because it was hard to hear people because there were so many folks talking at the same time. And it really made me feel uncomfortable and nervous. And as they start to think about that situation and then this upcoming social situation, they notice that it then provokes anxiety in their body. They notice that, they may tense up. They may notice that their heart starts to race a little bit. So that's an example of top down. It starts with how we're thinking about something, which then influences the body. But then there's also bottom up processing. And that's when there is interpretation of sensory information, things that we see, things that we touch, things that we smell, things that we hear, which then sparks an emotional reaction, which occurs well before we can even interpret it cognitively. So that might be, we hear a loud noise, and that might make you jump. It's a startle response. We don't think about having the startle response, we just have it. And then maybe we do have an anxious response because we're like, oh my gosh, what was that? Is everything okay? Or, for me, one might be if I open up a pickle jar and I smell the pickles, I immediately start to have a mouth-watering effect. It's not that I'm thinking about how much I love pickles, although that comes usually after my mouth starts watering, but it's more I smell it and immediately those salivary glands go to work. So as you can see, top down starts up here with thinking and then works down to our body. Bottom up starts with the body and works up to interpretation by our brain. And we need both kinds of processing. And what I find though sometimes is that top down processing may sometimes result in us dismissing some of our emotional experiences because we shouldn't feel something or it doesn't make sense. So I'll hear people say, oh, I'm just overreacting, or I'm fine, or others have it worse than me. So sometimes we end up rationalizing very valid and very real physical and emotional things that are going on inside of us. And sometimes our brain and our body might be attuned to things that we're not actually all that consciously aware of. And that's why it can be really important to acknowledge and highlight that bottom up processing. And so, specific to some of my folks who are managing Parkinson's symptoms, they'll say that sometimes they'll feel anxious and they don't really know why. They feel a sense of restlessness or uneasiness in their body because and then it kind of confuses them because they might not be thinking about anything stressful. And sometimes that can be due to medication wear off. Sometimes it can be from dyskinesia during peak doses of medication. And, other times, it can be almost an emotional burst during something physical. So sometimes I'll have patients say that when they're exercising, all of a sudden they find themselves crying and they don't really know why. And then they may interpret those sensations or those emotions to mean something's wrong. They're unsafe. There's some sort of dread ahead of them, or that something is overwhelming and they can't meet the expectations of a situation, like going to a social event. Or they may then say, gosh, I'm just being silly. I shouldn't do this. Come on, this is nothing. And they may admonish themselves and minimize the experience. So we know that with mindfulness, we actually need both top down as well as bottom up processing. And the research shows that, having both of those things activated helps us to best understand ourselves and our environment so that we can respond adaptively. And specifically with bottom up, we find that experienced meditators are actually really good at some of the bottom up focus with mindfulness. So it's something to work on because it can help enhance the experience of mindfulness. So we know that with bottom up, it can drive a lot of our fight or flight or freeze reflexes. So that's the amygdala in the brain lighting up like a Christmas tree. And there's this focus on some of our sensory experiences with mindfulness where we're meant to be curious about it and looking at it with a beginner's mind. And that helps us to maybe sometimes better understand and regulate that fight, flight, freeze reaction. So by actually then leaning into and engaging in our sensory experiences, it can have a calming effect on our body and then maybe influence how we're thinking about the situation so that we can see it more clearly and maybe be less reactive towards it. So we're going to do a mindfulness exercise today that focuses on your senses. So again, in those moments when you may notice a bottom-up process where your body is having a reaction that might be triggering a strong emotion for you, being able to engage in your senses, being able to kind of lean into your body and say, okay, what's it trying to tell me here? What am I feeling? What am I noticing? Can help us to then see through the forest a little bit more clearly and be able to kind of ground in our present moment experience without judgment, which again is the core essence of mindfulness, being aware and engaged in the present moment without judgment. So let's go ahead and get into a comfortable position. And, for some that may be seated, for some that may be lying down or feet propped, whatever works best for you. And as you get settled, you can close your eyes if it's comfortable for you, or just find a soft fixed point a few feet in front of you if that's better. I'll just start with connecting to that sensation of breath. The breath is a constant active anchor for us, as a sensation that's always cyclic, always present. To be able to engage in the breath and sometimes help us tune into our bodies a little more clearly. Just noticing how the breath feels as it passes through your nostrils or mouth, into your lungs, as it gently comes back out. Noticing how your body may settle a little bit more into whatever furniture you are seated on today. Giving yourself permission to just be here right now. As you begin to anchor into this moment, consider transitioning your attention to your sense of touch. You could start with your feet, noticing any sensations of touch on your feet, maybe the pressure points you feel with them on the floor. Maybe you feel the touch of a shoe or sock. Perhaps even just the air that touches any bare skin. Maybe also noticing anywhere else in your body where you can feel air touching your skin. Perhaps around your hands or face, legs. And just noticing any coolness or warmth to that air and where you may feel it most. And now consider shifting your attention to sound. Noticing any sounds in your environment. Maybe any sounds that you are making, perhaps while breathing. Any background noise from outdoors or another room. You might notice that some sounds are welcomed. Some sounds are less pleasant. Some may just be neutral and just kind of there in the background. If you notice that your mind starts to wander from your senses, that's okay. Your mind is a living thing and will sometimes want to stretch its legs to other thoughts. You can just gently bring it back to where you want your focus to be. And here, you can either choose to stay with your sense of touch or sound, or if you wish, you can move your attention to smell. And if you choose to do that, maybe noticing any scents around you. Maybe noticing some that you hadn't noticed before turning your attention to it. Again, sometimes we may notice that our body has a very quick response to certain smells. And it can engage sometimes our memory banks a little bit more acutely. Just noticing, feeling this curiously. And now you can certainly feel free to stay with your sense of smell or touch or sound. But if you feel comfortable doing so, if your eyes are closed, consider opening them and looking at something in front of you with beginner's mind, seeing it with fresh eyes, without labeling or judging. Oh goodness, my house is so cluttered, or oh my gosh, I need to dust this furniture. No judgment. Just seeing the object as if you're looking at it for the first time. Noticing textures, colors, lightness, darkness. Just noting how it feels to give your full attention to your senses. As you stay anchored to one of these senses, remember that this is always something that you can come back to. You can examine your physical senses to stay rooted in the present. It can help you to understand what your body might be telling you, what your emotions may be telling you. And to be able to engage in this non-judgmentally can not only help you to ground in what's going on right now, but then also how to then respond in the most adaptive, helpful way possible, given whatever circumstances are at hand. Remember that this anchor is always inside of you when you need it, and especially when some of these physical symptoms or emotional experiences start to become strong. We don't have to diminish or ignore. Sometimes anchoring to them helps us to get through it much quicker and more clearly. So let's take one more deep breath here, allowing your lungs to fill, bringing all of that nourishing oxygen to your body. And slowly, like air from a tire, letting yourself exhale. And then when you're ready, coming back to our virtual room here, bringing your attention to all of our wonderful participants. And once you have a moment to process, would love to hear how your experience of mindfulness went today. Because as we know, it's never the same experience twice. When you dip your foot into a river, it's never the same water twice, right? And so with mindfulness practices, it can vary depending on the day. Some days it's fantastic. Some days it's less so. Some days you may notice something that you've never noticed before. So I find that it can be really helpful for us to process that together because everyone's experience ends up being so unique. So we have Karen who said it was a mesmerizing meditation. Love the alliteration. And yeah, it can be really interesting sometimes to engage with our senses in that way, because I think we so often judge our senses. Something's too loud, something, it smells too strong, or, something is, too warm, too cold. And so sometimes to be able to just engage with what we feel without that judgment attached, without, that bottom up becoming fully enmeshed in what's wrong, I think often can be quite helpful. Let's see, Carol said, I could stay with touch, but I kept being distracted when focusing on other senses. So I think that's good information for you to know about yourself and your body. If you did notice that maybe one sense was easier to link into than others, I think that that can sometimes help you understand what helps me to anchor in some of those moments, perhaps when I'm overwhelmed. So for some people, touch is a very strong one. So I have some people who, they have, one of the good old stress balls. When they start to feel anxious or overwhelmed, they have that stress ball because having that tactile sense engaged really helps them to kind of anchor and not become overwhelmed. So if you know that about yourself, or if you know that, sound is one that really engages you, being able to listen to music or listen to a meditation or, something like that can also be really helpful. And so, kind of use this experience to know what might my body be telling me. And then we had Peggy, who said it was relaxing, peaceful, and restorative. John said, easy and relaxing to do at home in a quiet setting would be challenging in public settings or around other people. Yes, that is phase 2, right? So being able to do this in an uninterrupted environment that is otherwise quiet and not chaotic is step 1. That is the place to start this. And as you kind of grow your practice and you become better at it, it then becomes easier to do this in the more, cacophonous situations where there's all this noise and movement and people and, just stuff that's going on around you. So start easy, start at home with, a much more controlled setting, and then start to up the ante. And then someone said it was hard to open my eyes, but trying to see familiar surroundings for the first time and without judgment was surprisingly calming. Yeah, I know it's that beginner's mind piece can be really interesting to try because there's so many things we've seen 1,000 times over, and we just kind of take it for granted. And then when we look at it as if we've never seen it before, it helps to engage a different area of our brain that helps us to stay in that moment because we're describing something. And then Donna said, very relaxing, except for background noise was disturbing. And for that, I apologize. I work in a very busy hospital with a very large and aggressive parking circle right out my window that sometimes becomes a very passionate place for people. So I apologize for that. Okay, so I think we're right at time for today. So I'm glad that we were able to be respectful of everyone's time here. And thank you so much for joining us. And I'll pass it back to Krista.
Thank you, Dr. Rush. And making a comment about the background noise, right? It's a practice where we can take these distractions and see if we can be present with them, despite the sounds, the smells, the tastes, the feels that might come up. Can you truly be present with the moment now? That includes sounds. So thank you for mentioning that, dear friend, and would like to challenge you a little bit to drop into that moment of discomfort or less than ideal sounds. So thank you all so much for your time, and really looking forward to how this practice of bottom up processing helps you throughout this week until I see you again soon. May you be well, may you be present, and may you continue to live life fully. We'll see you so soon. And until then, take care.